order, please. Got a few items tonight, but we're gonna start with a summary of the closed session on January 21st, 2025 from our city attorney, Tanner.
All right. So from the closed meeting on January 21st, 2025, a meeting was closed to conduct a performance evaluation of the city administrator, Jeff Shoebridge, under Minnesota Statute 13D.05 Subdivision 3A. There was discussion on potentially giving a raise to the city administrator, discussion on the importance of the city administrator residing in Crookston and being present in the community. However, there was a notation about the lack of available housing in Crookston. There was a discussion on the city's desire to set key performance indicators and performance expectations for the administrator and desire that those be established going forward. There was discussion by council members on the difficulty with retaining city administrators, difficulty hiring administrators, and the city of Crookston's particular difficulty retaining qualified, long-serving city administrators. There was discussion on the city administrator being put in a particularly tough spot with the audit being extremely short-staffed during the audit time and also when he started. There was discussion on the city administrator being at the job for only 6 months and the difficulty with evaluating someone's performance in a short window, but again noting the particularly difficult situation this city administrator was in. There was discussion on the city administrator being financially well-versed, but that the city council did request a line-by-line review of the budget. There was discussion on the importance of retaining leadership and institutional knowledge, discussion on the evaluations that were submitted, discussions about background context on why a raise was being considered at 6 months, as well as discussion on establishing a raise based on the key performance indicators previously mentioned. There was discussion about the city administrator being positive about city happenings publicly and bringing concerns forward to the city council. Discussion about the council's desire to have department heads attending city council meetings. Discussion about receiving information in advance of the meeting. Discussion on what the city administrator's strengths are and things the council would like to see differently. Discussion on the budgeting process and presentation of the budget information. Discussion about the need for a comprehensive plan and strategic planning to guide this and future councils as well as our city administrator. At this point, the information was relayed to the city administrator. The city administrator provided the council with some information regarding salaries of various city administrators in comparable areas. The city council desired additional time to review this information before making a decision on a potential pay raise, and everyone agreed that a subsequent closed meeting would occur at the next regularly scheduled council meeting, which I believe is now next Monday. And that is the summary of everything that was discussed that's public in the closed meeting from January 21st, 2025. Obviously, I've not included information that I would determine to be personnel data, such as the specifics of the evaluations that were conducted, but this summary is a very thorough documentation of everything that was discussed at that meeting.
Thanks, Tanner.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, we got the introduction of this workshop with Aimee. Not sure where you're from.
I'm playing with, I'm from the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust.
Okay.
And I should have two colleagues from the League of Minnesota Cities Research also joining me. And I'm working on getting which PowerPoint up to show. So I apologize, I was being distracted by technology. It turns out that they have a slideshow and I have a slideshow, and they're slightly different. So I'm gonna go with mine to start and then turn it over to them in just a minute. Hopefully they can hear me saying this through the magic of whatever you have. So thanks for having me here, appreciate it. As I understand it, Mayor and council members, this is a workshop, so fairly informal. Our first name's okay?
Yep.
Okay. And so we were going to have some more dialogue, so the agenda you will see had both some time to listen and have the folks from the League of Minnesota Research and your own city attorney present information, and then some time for discussion. However, you've got some illnesses and injuries going on, as does happen. So we thought we would, since we're organized, I came on up to see y'all. We'll do the presentation part. And you may need to pick up some of the dialogue part, meaning once you're presented the information, is there anything that you want to do differently or pick up or discuss may need to occur when you have the full council here. So that's the plan. So just a few quick pieces for transparency reasons. I'm going to tell everyone everything that we did to prepare for this meeting, which includes the self-assessment. We had 14 people respond, which is a really good response rate. That would include council members, and I think department head level and above were asked to complete self-assessments. And just to say, that's a snapshot, right? A moment in time. It's not, we don't give you like hard data because it's not intended to be anything more than give us an idea to help us decide what of the many things we could spend an hour of your time on with roles and responsibilities, which ones seemed like they were most important to Crookston. We had an agenda planning meeting. Your city clerk and administrator were there, along with city attorney, and then we asked for 2 council members. So Councilmember Jardy and Briggs were also a part of that call to help develop the agenda, so help us make sense of what we were hearing. The meeting goals that we came up with in that meeting was to understand how city charters work, right? So in general, our legal staff can't give legal advice and they can't interpret your charter. So this is a tag team effort with your city attorney to talk more generally about the roles and responsibilities, and then your city attorney will fill in some Crookston specific information. And we talked about agenda setting, how you want your meetings to run, and orienting new members as some of the areas that might be of interest to you as a council to talk more about in terms of how you want things to go. So we can come back to that. It's certainly not the only thing on the list, or you can disagree, right? So that's sort of how we got to where we are today. Any questions or comments, who we talked to, what we did? Okay. So this is just a quick slide about what I do, because I have a funny title. My background and training is as a mediator, facilitator, and lawyer. For many years, this is my retirement job. So I ran my own shop until COVID, and I decided it was time to shut it down. So I went to work for Dan Greenswag, who directs the trust, who was a client of mine in my business. So now I drive around Minnesota helping cities build capacity, do collaboration, and I highlighted strength and structure because that's where roles and responsibilities fit in. This isn't a big collaborative invitation. I mean, I'm happy to come back if you should need me. But how I viewed it, or the bucket is in, are there things that perhaps were unwritten or worked until they didn't, or were sort of assumptions that when you hear roles and responsibilities, you think you can tighten up? And we would talk through that today, help you identify it. And then really, it's only as good as if the group agrees to hold yourself accountable to it. So then you would have the chance to decide what you want policies, such as how do we put things on the agenda, for example. We probably won't go that far today, but I just wanted to give you kind of the whole picture of why I'm hanging out with you. So here's the agenda. We talked about that. Here's your responses to that self-assessment, just to give you an idea of why we went the route we did. The most frequent, Lee mentioned roles and responsibilities related topics, and of the 14, everybody said at least one of these. We're understanding and staying within roles, authority for roles, and then the tie between developing policy, clarifying expectations, and how the roles work together. I took that to mean it's one thing to be able to spout back what the law says, this is my role, versus how does that mean when we actually put it in action? And how do we improve whatever we want to do by having a better common understanding, right? Mistrust occurs when you can do things more than one way and people have different ideas of how you're supposed to do it. So any amount of clarification, codification, documentation of those things that you do, that helps you run more smoothly as a city. Make sense? And then items to work on, 13 of the 14 people said planning for the future. And everybody said it wasn't good. 13 said not good, and one person said okay. So I understand from Jeff that you have plans in place to do some planning or prioritizing kinds of exercises. So that's not something we're touching on, but it was notable that it was the highest thing, and good to hear you're working on it. Budgeting was another thing that you may have some processes for budgeting that you talk about, but again, that might be something that's outside the scope of the strengthening the structures. The teamwork and communications are the ones that we're gonna focus on the most, based on what we heard. Okay? Any questions about that? I put this in here since we probably won't be talking about it. I will just invite you, if as you're talking and you're hearing presentations from the speakers tonight, you think, boy, that really isn't clear, or we are doing this thing differently, certainly could be helpful to make a note of that. You know, oh, we'd like to come back to that, so that you end up with, once your colleagues have viewed the video of this, with some ideas of the things you might want to do. Okay? And now, I'm gonna change over to the one that my colleagues were using.
It's not viewing on the screen.
Is that presenting? It's not. So Josie and Lexi are both there. I'm gonna ask you to introduce yourselves while I get your slideshow going. Oh, there it is. Can everybody see it?
I have to do a share screen.
It did. Maybe I have to share it again.
Okay, while we wait, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll start. I'm Lexi Wentworth. I'm a staff attorney with the League's research department, and I'll be one of the individuals speaking with you today.
And my name is Josie Rosene. I'm also a staff attorney in the League's research department. If you don't know, Lexi and I in the research department are usually the people that are on the other end of the phone when you call, or the other end of the email inbox if you email us questions that you have about city councils, daily kind of responsibilities, anything municipal law related. We are the people that answer questions.
Are you seeing are you seeing that I think I'm on your page now?
Yes, yep, that looks good. Thank you, Aimee. Okay, so I guess to start, we just wanted to go through, based on feedback that we heard from everyone at the agenda setting meeting, and talk a little bit about charter cities generally. And as Aimee mentioned, we are a little constrained in our presentation because we cannot provide legal advice. And with charter cities, a lot of roles and responsibilities of council and staff will be laid out in the city's charter. So we'll just be speaking more generally about what we see with charter cities across the state, and then Tanner can speak more specifically to the city of Crookston's city charter. You can go to the next slide, Aimee. Thank you. So generally the way, and we just kind of wanted to give an overview too of charter cities versus statutory cities. There's a lot of confusion about the differences between the two, and ultimately how they affect city roles and responsibilities. And so the way that city government is organized has a direct effect on the roles and responsibilities of city council and staff. And this may or may not come as a surprise to you, but many people that we work with at the League don't know their form of city government. And this often leads to a lot of confusion and tension among council members and staff about the duties that they can and should be carrying out. So generally in Minnesota, cities are either charter cities or statutory cities. Charter cities are formally referred to as home rule charter cities, and they operate under the locally adopted charter, as well as Chapter 410 of the Minnesota statutes, and then any other laws that cover specific situations or apply to both charter cities and statutory cities. And then this is opposed to statutory cities who operate under the statutory city code, which is found in Chapter 412 of the Minnesota statutes. And then again, any laws that apply either to specific situations or both charter cities and statutory cities. And this distinction is just kind of important to note because in charter cities, again, as I said earlier, the city's charter will define what the roles and responsibilities of council members and staff are. And then in statutory cities, roles and responsibilities are are determined by the city's form of government. So if they're a standard plan, Plan A or Plan B city, and then kind of what form of government that they choose. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just generally what we see in charter cities. I believe when I looked just briefly at Crookston's charter, it mentions a weak mayor council form of government, although charters will be more specific about what that actually entails. So this is just more generally what we see in charter cities. There will be a weak mayor council form of government, and this is actually probably the most common form of government in both charter cities and statutory cities. And in these forms of government, administrative and legislative authority belongs to the city council, and the powers of the mayor are generally no greater or less than any other council member, and no individual council member will hold any specific administrative powers. They will be powers that the council holds as a group. You will see, though, that in a city with a weak mayor council form of government, the council has administrative authority, but can still appoint a city administrator that helps with the daily administration of the city. And a key issue in the creation of this kind of a position is the level of authority, and particularly we see a lot the supervisory authority over city staff. In some cities, the responsibilities might be essentially an expansion of the clerk's duties, and in other cities, we see sometimes that the administrator is given more broad powers. Overall, though, state law doesn't really mention or govern city administrators this position, and so a lot of times the duties will vary from city to city and kind of depend on how the city is structured, what their form of government is, and what their charter says. And generally, although the council holds administrative authority, the council can still delegate what are called ministerial duties to city administrators and city staff. And these are generally duties that don't require any discretionary decision making. And where the city administrator or whoever has this administrative authority will generally just follow kind of a list of criteria and follow instructions from the city council. And let's see. Okay. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about charter and statutory city forms of government, we just wanted to kind of cover the roles and responsibilities of council and staff more broadly. So typically when we think of council and staff roles and responsibilities, they'll look somewhat similar to this graphic where you have two different spheres that the council and staff are kind of overseeing on a daily basis. So typically the role of the council is to adopt policies and make ordinances in line with, the specific vision that the council has for the city. And then city staff will help to implement this vision and mission by administering city policies and managing the day-to-day operations of the city. And then I just wanted to note too that like in Crookston and in many other cities, sometimes we have both a city clerk and a city administrator position. Again, the roles and responsibilities of each will depend on what the charter says and how it addresses those roles. But typically, if cities have both roles, we see more often that a city clerk will have more of a record keeping and documentation role, and then the city administrator in turn performs more of the city administration duties and oversees daily operations, and also other tasks like recommending policies to the council, preparing budgets, financial statements, overseeing city programs, and many other duties as well. And that's it for my portion. I think we have time now to talk specifically about Crookston's charter.
All right, and as is always the case, the charter for Crookston is probably everyone's handbook. It should be the first stop when you have questions about what your role and responsibility is. As has been touched on, Crookston is, I guess, broadly classified as a weak mayor, strong council, administrator plan, meaning the original intent was for powers, decision-making, legislature, policy, that was to be vested by the council as a whole, not necessarily one council person, but the collective vote of the council on how to proceed. The mayor, in this situation, his powers are specifically delineated under section 2.06. I would argue that it's really not that weak of a mayor system. I assume the reason they called it that was because the mayor does not have a vote in normal proceedings. He is the person that's responsible for maintaining order at the meetings, for keeping council on topic, for deciding when a certain issue's maybe been talked about enough, and you know, even as I think Dale has done before, is telling people that, all right, we're ready to call for the question. Those are all things that the mayor can do. He's the head of the meeting. He's kind of like the judge in a courtroom is the way I see it. He's trying to keep things efficient, trying to keep people on task, and trying to make sure we get through our business as quickly as possible while also getting all the information. Now, the reason I say that I don't think the mayor is necessarily weak mayor is mostly because of the mayor's veto power. The mayor for Crookston can actually veto any ordinance or resolution under its charter. And if it is vetoed, it requires 6 council members to overturn that veto. So in some ways, I would say his vote is more powerful than the initial sentence that it's a weak mayor is. That being said, our mayor, I don't think has often utilized the veto power. I'm gonna skip, there's a couple sections I need to touch on, but I'm gonna skip just because I didn't have this one highlighted. I don't want to forget it. It is the secretary of the council under section 303. That's the city clerk, or Ashley in this situation. Her job is generally to keep journal of all the council proceedings, perform other duties as required. But it's really kind of like the role that you see her in is providing the paperwork, providing the agendas. We just passed an ordinance indicating that she would be establishing the agenda for all meetings. That's Ashley's role in this proceeding, or in these proceedings. Backtracking now to the probably the most expansive part of the charter on these areas. This is under section 2.08. The council is able to investigate into the affairs of the city and conduct any of the city department, office, or agency that's investigating any of the city's affairs. They are required to provide for an audit of the city's accounts at least once a year. And they're required or able, it says may, able to do surveys or research studies on any subject of municipal concern. I interpret that to mean the city council is responsible for those big policy decisions. Hey, we need a comprehensive plan. Let's do a study on that. Hey, we need to do a different type of study on what our infrastructure is like. They're setting those plans in place. And again, as indicated by the league here, they also, of course, have the authority to make ordinances, resolutions. Ordinances are the legislature. They provide for penalties, either criminal or civil. They're kind of our enforcement arm as a city. Resolutions is just us conducting business as we do, approving bills that are above the city administrator's cap or those sorts of things, signing off on deeds, telling the mayor to sign a deed like we just did today. Section 2.09 is a unique and specific section in the charter for Crookston, and I'm just gonna read it. It says, except for the purpose of inquiry and investigation, the council, the mayor, and council members shall deal with and control city administrative officers and employees under the jurisdiction of the city administrator solely through the city administrator, and they shall not give orders to any subordinate of the city administrator, either publicly or privately. I honestly think this is maybe an area where we've had some issues. Under our charter, and of course our charter can be changed, but under our current reading of the charter, it would be inappropriate for a council person to directly tell someone underneath the city administrator to do something or research something. If they want to do that collectively as a group, they can do that at a meeting and say, hey Jeff, we need a capital improvement plan. Here's our direction as a group. We're telling Jeff to do that. Jeff will then take that to the appropriate individuals under his authority. It would be inappropriate for the city official or the city council person to go directly over Jeff and direct something to, let's say, Darren or something like that. So under our charter, it's pretty specific that anytime the council is trying to, I guess, anytime they're trying to control how the city is run, it needs to be going through Jeff first. He's kind of that middleman in our structure of government. Other than that, I don't think I had any other areas that I specifically wanted to touch on. One thing that I hoped from having this meeting is that we could just have some clarity on what everyone's role is in this process, and I think the league has already done a good job of kind of highlighting that. The way that I see it is probably best explained on that graphic that was up there. Council is deciding policy and big pictures. Administration is, and that's the whole administration, all the department heads and everyone. They're the ones that are trying to take action on what the council wants to do. So council is giving that upper level review of what needs to be done, and the administration through all of our staff here, they're the ones that are implementing what needs to be done. Any questions from anyone? Any comments from anyone? Any concerns about any of that?
Well, you know, regarding trying to keep council on task and so it's not such a long night, you know, I've tried to, you know, to move forward with it, and I've gotten an earful from council members from time to time regarding that. I can continue, it's an important decision to continue talking about this topic, and we've talked it to death.
I have noticed you have been in that situation, and the only reason I brought it up is because I think that is exactly what your role in these meetings is to say, all right, we've talked about this enough. It's time for us to have a vote on it. I think that is exactly your role. Now, whether or not council accepts that, or if they want to say more, I know you've tried. I'm just saying that in my interpretation, that is your role. You're the person that is, you're the judge of the council meeting. You need to be the one that is expected to hold order. And ideally, you know, if you're saying it's time for a vote on something, unless someone has something really important to say that they just, it's really important, then they would let that go. But I know you've tried. I've witnessed it.
Could you explain that, the last part of that section 2.09? Sounds like it's kind of redundant there.
So the last section of 2.09, it's a lot of words, and it that's why I kind of read it the whole thing. But the way that it says is, it says the council, the mayor, and the council persons shall deal with and control city administrative officers and employees solely through the city administrator. Which I interpret that to mean, you guys are telling your city administrator what to do, he's spreading out what you're telling him to the appropriate people that he thinks is appropriate.
So basically, if you want something done,
Yeah.
you can't, you know, from one of the departments, it's all gotta run through the administrator.
That's my interpretation of the charter as it's currently written, yep.
And just from a communication standpoint, then your city administrator would be reporting back to you. So there's also a responsibility on his part then to tell you what happened, right? So it's not a black hole, two-way communication, yeah.
That's clearly, yeah. Thank you.
Yep, and sometimes there's that too, where report backs, I think, are helpful and necessary, and you know, I think our department heads are gonna be at future meetings probably, so there can be some of that as well, but
With regard to how meetings run, Mayor, it can be useful to have a conversation with your council about that, outside of when you're in a heated topic, right? And decide some norms. It's often just, you know, at another workshop, it probably won't happen today, but I've worked with councils, for example, who say, okay, we want you to give everybody one more chance. You know, and go around, and then they didn't like it that one person who was on one side always got called on first, so they said, okay, one more chance, but start with different people. Or I don't know the answer, I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but you can get their buy-in to whatever process you're doing. Outside of when you're sitting there managing the meeting, it could be helpful. That's an example of one of the clarifications that could be useful.
and that's, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted this meeting is to say publicly that I believe when the mayor is trying to, you know, get things, to have things move forward, or when he's cutting people off, I don't think he's doing it out of ill will or to silence anyone. The reason is because that's his role in these proceedings, is to try to get through this stuff.
I think our mayor does a really good job explaining these kind of things, and those things happen, so I have to give him credit for that. It's a good job that way.
Yes, and I just, from an administrative standpoint, along that line, it's like, the mayor has a very difficult spot, because there's a fine line. The true strict interpretation of Robert's rules, everybody gets one chance to speak and one chance to direct rebut. Whereas most circumstances, that's not enough discussion to come to a real solution or resolution. And so he has a very difficult job in trying to balance what is that appropriate amount of discussion versus the strict, I think, you know, I think so, he does a really good job with it, but it's a difficult balancing act.
Yeah, he does a good job with it.
Lexi or Josie could speak to this, but I know the league recommends not using the full book of Roberts, because you can spend, you need a parliamentarian and you can spend a lot of time debating rules, and so it's usually some Roberts light so that you can have more discourse, so, you know, that is a difficult and useful thing to do.
And we've never strictly used Robert's rules, but that is our fallback. If things were to boil over.
Absolutely.
I have a question on the 2.09 one. So some of us are on boards that oversee, so like the EDA, so then how does that work though?
So as an example with the EDA director takes direction from also that board as well. And I guess if you're on that board, you providing your input in that session would be fine. The problem is that it will ultimately have to come back to the city, and it needs to come through our administration as well. So EDA board approves the project, it then needs to come back through the city administrator or administrative offices, and then come back before the entire council after that, which admittedly is, it's circular a little bit for you because you're on two boards, the board and then also city council, but that's how I think it should probably be done.
So, but I just like giving the directive, so if, let's say I'm meeting in the EDA and we're giving directive that way. Or if it's a meeting on that, I mean, I don't.
I mean, if it's something that the EDA board can give directive on, then they can give directive on that. And you as a part of that, I understand, would maybe have a say in that, but it needs to be something that the EDA board can actually give directive on, which I think they've done a good job of lately. But eventually it'll have to come back through our administration as well.
Other questions? You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay,
More?
No, I'm done.
All right, I'm gonna turn it back to Josie and Lexi.
okay, okay. Understand how cities work, how they operate, what the structure of meetings are going to be, so that you're making sure that council business is done properly and efficiently. Just having certain things in place can help you do that. So one way we talk about this, Aimee's kind of talked about a little bit of the ideas already, but one way that we encourage cities is to adopt council bylaws or council rules of order. We have samples of both, and so we can share them with you all, and something to work through with Tanner as to what you want to include. But they're all in our Minnesota Mayor's Handbook. You'll see that linked here in the slide, as well as we can share the actual link to it if that's easier. But the why, so you've kind of already addressed this, but if we're just talking through the why of why is this important, I guess maybe the easiest why is everything you've already identified, right? So making sure that we're all on the same page, so we have the same expectations, same values, making sure we're able to get things done. And then again, just helps with the timeliness, provides some kind of structure to get city business done efficiently. And then finally, this can help with resolve conflicts. If we all understand how things should be done or how they're expected to be done, we can make sure that we're getting things done in the best interest of the city, rather than disrupting the city operations and slowing down vital council decisions. So how can we do that? We talk about these bylaws or rules of orders. I have a list of things of what to include. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are just a few things to include. We've already gone through the city charter, but the bylaws or policies that you would put in place, these are to help out, to expand on the charter. So anything that would be adopted would have to comply with your charter provisions. And so that's why it's important to work with Tanner on any policies or bylaws or rules of order. I know someone mentioned Robert's Rules of Order. Aimee is correct. We usually recommend adopting the Robert's Rules of Orders because they are tricky and they just don't always work for cities or for every city. That's why we usually try to get cities to, use what works best for you and adopt policies and have those discussions. So again, you kind of already talked about these things, so I'm kind of just repeating what's already been said, but we talk about the presiding officer. Who is the presiding officer? It sounds like per your charter, it's your mayor. It sounds like you already kind of understand, but I'll go through generally what presiding officer duties are, what we use generally. So usually the presiding officer is the person who calls the meeting to order and proposes adjournment, recognize and call upon speakers, call for discussions, and interpret and enforce any meeting management policies, bylaws, or rules of order. So that's making sure we're staying on track, getting to the next point, making sure everyone is heard that needs to be heard within that meeting, those kinds of things. A few things that we talk about, what they shouldn't do is dominate the discussion. I know it can be hard, but making sure that they're really there to, it can be a part of the discussion, but also ensuring that everyone is able to get their say in it as well. And then another thing to include in these either bylaws or rules of order is the open meeting law. I won't get too into the open meeting law because we could talk for a whole nother 2 hours about the open meeting law, but it's a great thing to include that, all the officials within the meetings will abide by the open meeting law, what that means, what that looks like, those kinds of things. Procedures for discussion, motions and voting for the council, what that looks like, how we go about that. Again, there might be certain things that are already laid out in your charter, so you want to make sure nothing contradicts your charter. But again, if you need some more clarification, this is a great place to put that in. Another thing to add in these are the member decorum within meetings amongst themselves, but also with city staff and the public. So kind of, we've already kind of had those discussions about, it sounds like the city administrator and their role and city staff as well. So, feel free to write it all down and have it in something. So in a policy, that way there's something to refer to. It's a set expectation. And again, some of those things are in your charter, but if there's some things that aren't, kind of reopening those in the policies or these bylaws and rules of orders. And then finally, the order of business and agendas. Yep. Oh, that's okay, Aimee. I'm headed there now. So that's just fine. You can go to the next one. Again, agendas are something that you can put in the bylaws that I just talked about or the rules of order that I just talked about. It sounds like maybe there's sometimes some confusion about agendas and what needs to be included, who can add, those kinds of things. So while there's nothing clearly stated in the law regarding agendas, these are some questions that we pose to cities, charter and statutory cities both, to determine who prepares the agenda, who can place items on the agenda, when should requests to place items on the agenda be received by, can the council discuss items not on the agenda? This one's a trickier one sometimes because it likely depends on your kind of meeting that you're hosting, if it's a regular or a special meeting, but it also will depend on the meeting rules that the council has adopted and or your charter provisions. So again, why having those policies in place, including agendas in those policies are important. A few more questions are just how should the request be placed in to items. Sometimes there's an agenda request form that we'll see cities use. We have a sample. Again, it's in our Minnesota Mayor's Handbook, but we'll provide you that sample so you can take a look at it and see if it's something that your city wants to consider. Just a couple more, who reviews the requests, and then when will the agenda be delivered to council members? So having these things, answering these questions and putting them into your policy, bylaws, or your rules of order can really help, one, maybe have more efficiency, get things done a little bit more timely, and then as well avoid some conflict if everyone's on the same page about how things need to be done. All right, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And then the last thing we just wanted to talk about from your survey results was onboarding. So first I'll talk about, the league has what we call our city council member orientation packet. It has a model table of contents. So this is a document that we felt included a bunch of information about things that you should put in there from your specific city for new council members. So, you might, and we'll provide you a copy of this template that we have, but you don't have to have everything in there. Feel free to add or delete things as you see necessary that specifically works for your city. But it seems helpful for new council members to kind of have this, I'll say, packet of information that you can provide to them when they're starting or even before they start to really get acquainted with the city in all aspects of, of course, you'd want to include the charter and policies or kind of the policies we just talked about, bylaws, rules of order, any other policies you might have. Some other ideas that you might have for some new council members that I've seen some cities do, again, provide them that charter that could be in that packet. Discuss any city processes that you already have. Sometimes I've seen, I know it's a little late this year, but I've seen some cities have their council member elects come into meetings, just sitting as the public. They're obviously just a member of the public at that point. They're not, they haven't taken the oath of office, so they're not actually on the council yet, but just to sit in a meeting if they've never been to one, see how it runs, see, just kind of get the lay of the land. Kind of helps get them a little bit acquainted rather than having to show up at their first council meeting and, they're taking actions and listening to things that can be a little overwhelming. So another thing I've seen is having one-to-one meetings between the city administrator or clerk or someone on the staff between the new council member who can maybe answer any questions that they might have about how do things work, what, you know, what needs to happen, those kinds of things. And, you know, anything else you can do to really get those new council members acquainted with how city government works, because there's a lot to it. The next step is, of course, we have a lot of resources on our website, memos, handbook, chapters. We do webinars. We have our member learn courses. There's an elected leaders foundational course on our member learn courses. That's a great starting point for new council members. All of that information will be included in that council orientation template that I talked about a minute ago, but you know, feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions about, you know, what can new council members gain from our resources. And then the final plug for onboarding is, of course, our events. We have a lot of them throughout the year, so check on our website throughout the year or reach out to us. We're happy to help you with that. We currently have the Elected Leaders Institute. It happens every year. It's coming up next week. The first one's next week. And so that's just a really great opportunity for newly electeds to go in person, learn the basics of city government, ask any questions they have, those kinds of things. We also have our loss control circuit, which goes through a bunch of different resources. We have, I don't know how many different locations. I want to say like close to 10. Every year it changes a little bit, but so it's an opportunity, you know, we're coming out into we come out into greater Minnesota, so you don't have to always travel further. But again, there's other events too, and so we're always welcome to check those out on our website or reach out. Like Josie said, we're in the research department, so we can help with those questions, or if you have more complex questions that you need some answers on, feel free to reach out. And as with all these policies and ideas, not necessarily maybe with the onboarding part, but the actual policies that I talked about, of course, work with Tanner on these before adopting, because you want to make sure everything complies with your charter. And he's a great resource for the city to use. So are there any questions on that? Or otherwise I'll turn it over to Aimee.
Questions or thoughts? Thank you.
We have one new member. I believe he's already signed up for the lead training.
We love to hear it.
It's a wealth of information. I know I've went and I did a refresher course a couple of years ago for, can't remember the term, elected or, well, you got elected and then you got, if you're already in office.
There's like advanced track.
Advanced,
Yeah,
there you
I don't
go.
know
Went to that one, so it's a boatload of information. It's a kind of refresher course too, so it was great.
All right, I'm gonna reshare my version of our PowerPoint. Let's see. Just to show you a couple other slides I had, and then I think we'll see where you wanna go from there. What's this one? All right, so I'm not, just because you're not a full council, I'm just gonna highlight these ideas. I don't know that I'll take you through the exercises. But I just thought I'd share a couple other ways that cities think about roles and responsibilities. Because for me, where I see cities having the most challenges in how you implement it, like how do we communicate to each other, how do we work together as a team? Okay, so maybe some people will remember the first pro basketball players that went to the Olympics. You remember this, what happened to them? It was all the big shots, the Michael Jordans, and I grew up in Chicago, right?
Dream team.
The dream team. They were terrible at first, because they had, everybody was really good and they knew their role and they had their specific way, they had learned how to work on their other teams, but when they came together, they had no sense of how to work together. And I think that really is one of the sweet spots of how to get your city functioning is to think about what is the culture you want as a team, right? Some of the ideas about orienting would be, if the council decides how you want to be, then being able to share that information with a new member to try to figure out how you're gonna work best for your community. It doesn't mean you can't change it, right? Doesn't mean you can't go, well, times have changed, right? Now we need to look at a new way of doing things. But it's a way of creating some consistency so that, when you're working on one thing, it might touch the council making a policy decision, which is then given to your city administrator who has staff doing research and coming back, right? So everybody needs to be able to figure out how you function together as well. So these are some of the pieces I think about in terms of how you implement. One would be that as the council, your time horizon is the farthest out, right? So you're the only group that can make policy as the council together. Nobody else can make policy, right? And so you're focusing on the ends, like what do we want for our city? How are we going to make hard decisions about, how to spend our money or what resources we need or what, all of those choices, those are the hard choices, and that really is your responsibility to make those decisions. How that gets implemented, right, is not something that you spend your time on, right? You hold your city administrator and clerk to some extent accountable, right, according to your charter, for bringing that back, for bringing information back to you, for your department's heads, they're gonna share expertise, right? But that's not your place to get into the means of it. It is for you to decide the ends. Never jump more than one jump in the chain, right? Command is another way to look at it. And realize that your role is special, right? It's actually not the most common way people think, right? We tend to work right into problem solving. It's just most people, you wanna help, you wanna solve a problem, where you're being asked to do something that's a little bit different, which is to say, how do I really look at not just this today's problem, but look at what we want from now on? What precedent are we setting? What direction are we going by the decisions that we're making? So it's a big responsibility. And I thought I'd show you one other slide. Without taking you through it. This is one that a couple cities have, I got permission from Edina who put the graphic together. And it's now been copied by a couple, I just thought it was helpful. This is what's in their code. Their policy is not one that is written out in terms of, a lot of paragraphs. And so it's just kind of a useful graphic, I think. And now that I got permission to share it from Bemidji. Now I feel like I can share it to everybody. Bemidji actually liked it so much they put it in their policies. It just, again, this doesn't have to be exactly what you do. I just wanted to give you an idea of that, some of the things that other cities, how they've implemented these ideas I'm talking about. So are there any other questions? How that works. I don't think I'm gonna go into the rest of this because it's team building and yet the team isn't here. I guess I'll tell you one reason for this, which is, have you ever heard of the 5 dysfunctions of team? Yeah, it's pretty common. There's a lot of different, I like this guy Lencioni who wrote it. I changed it because I'm about being positive. I changed it to the 5 functions of team. I'm not the only one. But just to point out that if you focus on the results, like sat down and said, okay, let's just have our city administrator read out a policy, the lawyer check it, and we'll do it, right? If you have not done the base parts of what Lencioni talks about, of building trust and talking it through and making sure everyone's committed, then all you have is a piece of paper, right? So this is my moment to encourage you to schedule another workshop to talk about how do we want to be, right? And how do we want to operate, and what can we as a team commit to so that when you're looking at the results, what you have, that there's something that everyone's actually willing to hold yourselves accountable for. Because with responsibility comes accountability, right? So I'm not gonna do that, but I would encourage you, I can come back if you decide you want me to. Or you can do it with existing resources. I am free. The best part about my new job at the League of Minnesota Cities is I no longer have to bill anybody. So I would be happy to come back another time, if it turns out you want, okay?
Well, if we do that, we'll try to coordinate your schedule when you're nearby anyways. That's a long drive.
That's right, yeah, and as I said, I'm going to Thief River Falls for a training tomorrow, so I'm just passing through tonight, so it's no bother to stop by. Any other comments? All right, I'm gonna turn it back to you, Mayor, then.
Thank you, thank you.
Question. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley, cause you will.
Don't feel bad, sir. She does that to me too. It's usually appreciated.
So it takes 3 council members to put something on the agenda, correct? Or if they want something?
I meant to address that, I'm sorry. So the way our charter reads is that the mayor can add something to the agenda or set a meeting and any group of 3 council persons. The way the charter reads is that this is done through a special meeting process, but in the interest of just being efficient, I've interpreted and told other city council members that if you have a group of 3, you wanna add something to the agenda, let's not have a special meeting on it, let's just put it on a regular agenda. Unless you need a special meeting for whatever reason, it's an emergency or something.
My question is this happened a few times where 3 council members wanted something on the agenda. Shouldn't that be discussed down here versus wherever they decide to do this and all of a sudden it's thrown at us?
You know, ideally, in a perfect world, it would be discussed in front of everyone, but sometimes there isn't time for that, from what I understand. If something comes up pretty quickly and we have a group of 3 that want something on the agenda with 3 days' notice, which I think is what is required, but yeah, but instead of you know, doing that publicly with everyone, which would be the best, those 3 can, in my opinion, add something to the agenda, or in the alternative, they could set a special meeting to occur right before or right after the agenda.
Did you say 3 days notice?
Well, that's generally what we require for our agendas. We don't have, we can go quicker than that too.
Okay.
But generally speaking, that's what our staff prefer, is my understanding.
Okay.
And Tanner, I will defer to you. You're the attorney. Generally, outside of an emergency circumstance, there's normally a 3-day notice under statute. Is that correct?
Yep, yeah, I think that's accurate. We have in our charter that it needs to be at least 12 hours, but it also needs to comply with the laws of the state of Minnesota. And you can have those emergency situations, like I know we did for the flooding that happened, I think 3 years ago. There are circumstances where that notice isn't required, but usually the more notice, the better for everyone's sake. I bet these guys know off the top of their head. Is it, it's 3 days for public meetings?
Correct. 3 days notice for a special meeting.
3 days.
So our charter says 12 hours, but it also has in the next sentence of that it also needs to comply with the laws of Minnesota. So I would interpret that to mean the longer of the 2, which would be the 3 days then.
Just for my 2 cents, your team members, so the whole point, there's a purpose to the rules, right? It's to avoid the gotcha. So every once in a while, like you said, there's an emergency, but the point would be if you want to keep everybody on the same page so you can make the best policy possible. I don't know, because I haven't followed, you know, people only call me when they're having trouble. Right, so I have a very skewed view of the world, right? But what I will say is that it can be a challenge for cities if, say, there's a decision been made on, I don't know, you know, a big development project or something, and then somebody keeps putting it on the agenda. So those are other things you can talk about policy-wise, right, in terms of without doing anything your charter doesn't allow, how do you want to hold yourselves accountable for staying on the same team. People will say, you know, you can't put something on the agenda if it was voted on last month unless there is some, big difference or change. Or I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying you can think through it, what's gonna work for you. And you can have policies that help you run your meetings more efficiently and help avoid the surprises. Make you feel empowered, as opposed to handcuffed by your charter.
Sometimes on adding things to the agenda, if there are 3 interested council persons on adding something to the agenda, in my opinion, I don't think there's a reason not to do it, just to have that discussion. I think that is, especially when there's 3, I know that that's not a majority by any means, but if they were to seek a majority, that would be a serial meeting, which would be a different violation. So under our charter, I think, having 3 council members being able to add something to the agenda, or the mayor, I think that seems fair, I guess, from my point of view.
And just so the council is aware, to be transparent with everything, the guidance that I've given staff is for any agenda items that come to me to go on the agenda. I've asked for the agenda item plus all of the required supporting documentation so that council has the information to intelligently discuss and deliberate and make a decision. With that, I've instructed my staff that without that background information, we're just throwing talking points. With that, the council needs that information to make decisions.
Good question on the putting things on the agenda. I did mean to cover that and I failed to, but I think a policy with that point would be helpful as well, just to have that in policy and who to even send that request to. They have forms, it sounds like, where they can have that request for an agenda item. Who that will go to, I don't think it necessarily needs to come to me. I think that has been the practice thus far, but I think a policy kind of delineating where that goes, how that's done would be helpful for everyone's sake.
So basically, if it's 3 days before the regular council meeting, can that be adjusted where they can present it and it would be
3 days.
not at the next council meeting, but the following one? Or not?
It depends on the issue at hand. Just as an example, the most recent item that got added to the agenda, there was something on that agenda already that kind of pertained to that topic. So it made a whole lot of sense to have that item be added to that agenda because we were going right into the closed session. It wouldn't have helped us at all to have that discussion happen after we already did the closed session that had been planned. So I think it depends on the item that is gonna be tried to be added. If it can wait, if they're not gonna make the notice in time and it could wait till the next council meeting, I think for sure we could go that route. I think a policy kind of saying when those situations are, those 2 different situations, when they're arising would be helpful, although it might not be very effective to try to word that in a way. I can't think of a way where we could word an emergency like that, but.
Lexi, were you gonna say something?
Not necessarily. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't confusions on it sounds like maybe not, you're worried more so about the agenda, but the special meeting versus a regular meeting, right? We have to have different notices. That's the open meeting law that we're talking about, right? So when we talk about a regular meeting, and again, you'd have to follow your charter, and it sounds like your charter has specific requirements for when you have to have your agenda done. But the regular meeting is your regular scheduled. So if you meet every Monday at 5:30, if that's your regular time, just making sure that that's a different requirement than your special meeting. If you set up a special meeting, you have to have that 3 days notice. And so again, there's not necessarily the requirement for the agenda to be done, but you can't add things to an agenda for a special meeting without that 3-day notice. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's maybe part of the confusion, but I just wanted to make sure that was
And I
clear.
think I appreciate that clarification, and for the most part, we avoid special meetings. I don't know that we've had many. But yeah, I appreciate that clarification.
And just for practicality's purpose, I try to be pragmatic with things, but this is for the agenda to have the statutory compliance notice. I would ask council, please keep in mind, staff still needs to assemble the agenda in time to get that notice out. If someone sends an, I want this on the agenda precisely 72 hours before the notice period, Ashley doesn't have time to assemble it, email it, and get it to where it goes. So I think, to speak to what Tanner and everyone here is saying, I think we need to come up with, and I think we do have a policy right now that has a cutoff Wednesday noon that gives Ashley, and I believe that is our policy, that gives Ashley that time to be able to process administratively so that she can still assemble the agenda and have it posted in compliance. I just don't wanna get so far down the weeds of the technicality of the law that we forget the pragmatic reality of it's still human beings doing all of this work.
Usually we're usually posting our agendas on the Friday before the meeting. And I do recall that, I don't know if it probably is written somewhere, that we want agenda items added on that Wednesday before. I don't know if it was in writing, but I do recall that is just to ease the administrative burden on our staff. I know a lot of Ashley's job is setting the agenda, and compiling documents and making sure she has resolutions ready, and contracts and leases and all those things. I'm sure she appreciates as much time as people can give her. Understanding that we also are a government and are hindered in how quickly we can do things.
Yeah, just wanted to make that point that it's not fair to Ashley. Everyone else leaves at X time, Friday afternoon, the workday's over and leaving, and 10 minutes before 4:30, somebody dumps something on her lap and says, oh, by the way, and I'm not saying that it has happened, I just want us to be cognizant that, she spends a lot of time and a lot of effort, and she's very open to helping anyone do what she needs to do. But it's also not fair to Ashley with late additions, late items at the last minute. It's a Friday night, we all wanna get home for the weekend, and there's been times that she's been here very late in the evening putting things together.
Any other questions or comments for anyone?
Thank you, Tanner.
Thanks, Tanner. Very good sense.
That's good for tonight. All right, I'll turn it back to the mayor to close the meeting.
All right, any other questions? We will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Lexi.